Hello, everyone. This is the Startup Society's Foundation podcast. Today, we are joined by Gabriel Scheare working at Fort Galt, Chile. Gabriel, how are you doing today?
Very good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. So, tell me, Gabriel, what motivated you to do Fort Galt, Chile?
Oh man, if you go back a whole bunch of years, I was in Vancouver trying to figure out how can I live as free as possible. I had just read How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World by Harry Brown, and I was in the libertarian scene and all that. And so I got it in my head that, you know what, why don't I just get an RV and do the whole nomad thing? So I had that stuck in my head for a little while and I was working towards that. And then, boom, I saw this ad on YouTube, I believe it was in 2012, for a real estate project in Chile. And the idea was a whole bunch of freedom loving people all come together and live in the same spot. And I thought, hey, that sounds awesome. I'm going to go down and check that out. So I did. And long story short, it turned out to be a scam and everyone's hopes were dashed. But rather than going home and thinking like it was all a waste of time, I got together with some friends and we kind of took the idea back to the drawing board and said, why don't we just do this right? And so 3 years ago, it was just a crazy idea. And today it's 100 acres of oceanfront real estate in the Valdivian rainforest.
Excellent, excellent. And so, what is the most recent progress that you made? I know you've been starting to sell off plots of land, for instance.
Yeah, we've been selling plots of land that people can use to build their own homes on. And we've also been pre-selling rooms in the main community center building. And as far as that goes, we've sold half the rooms so far, and it has allowed us to begin with construction on the foundation.
Excellent. And I know this your project is more of like a co-working or co-living space, but do you consider it a bit of a startup society?
I think it's sort of the precursor to what will become a startup society. I think that um, individuals are in a very bad position and they're in basically no position to make any demands from the state. So expecting to get tax concessions or exemptions from the law and stuff like that is not very reasonable until you've kind of developed something that gives you leverage. So I figure that the sensible place to start is first gathering people to a physical location and kind of getting the team assembled. There's so many possibilities as to what you can do with that team in the future, whether it's building seasteads or finding a piece of land that you want to start, applying for exemptions from the law or taxes. And, there's all kinds of things that you can do eventually once you've got, people together. But the first step is just to get your team assembled.
That's a very interesting idea, and it ties in just to my next question on like how do you plan to get some sort of sovereignty? And it seems a big problem with many startup societies is that they're going for getting the sovereignty first, or even worse, they're going for the marketing aspect of it. Seems like it's a lot smarter to put people's money where their mouth is and actually have some economic growth come out of there. What are types of entrepreneurs that you want at Fort Galt to jumpstart this whole process?
Honestly, we're not too hung up on the whole sovereignty issue. I mean, we're basically taking a practical approach to freedom, and that is
Hmm.
like, how do you live every day? If you're, consumed and preoccupied with not being legally free in various different aspects, then you're actually sacrificing practical freedom for ideological freedom. And we prefer to kind of take the opposite approach. We want to practically live as free as possible, even if, we're not, legally exempt from, taxes and things like that. It's a matter of living with people that you're compatible with. Like when I was living in Vancouver, that was, the main gripe that I had with it is that everybody's living so closely together and they're so diverse in their opinions, in their philosophies, in their politics, their backgrounds, that they're constantly in sort of a mode of putting up barriers. When you live so close to people, you close your blinds, you build a
Right.
fence, trying to keep people out. Whereas I grew up on a farm where everyone was so spread out, where we actually had to make the effort to meet each other and have social events and all that kind of thing. So I'm kind of taking the small town farm atmosphere and vibe, and like libertarians, we tend to spend the first half of our lives trying to achieve freedom, trying to get away from control systems.
Right.
And once we finally achieve that, then it's like, okay, now what? Do I sit in my rocking chair with my dog and just be lonely for the rest of my life with my freedoms? or do I seek out like-minded people that I can actually get along with and start putting together a voluntary community? So I think that's the priority that is kind of, occupying all of our minds, is just taking that step. We want to get together so that we can live in a voluntary structure together and, then explore more options. We aren't worried about achieving sovereignty yet.
Okay, and I understand that point, and I love the idea of like trying to help yourself and trying to make yourself free, and then maybe that will have a ripple effect throughout. But if you'll let me, I'm kind of interested in this whole idea of sovereignty because yours is a very different method. Um, like, so I definitely agree. De facto, in the short term, having a community, you definitely live freer. But it's sort of a question of scaling. If you want a project like this to scale, you kind of need not just de facto freedom, like of voluntary interactions on a small scale. You kind of need recognition, so to speak. Like, for example, Freetown Christiana, it has total de facto freedom. There's very or no state, so to speak. However, they're starting to encroach upon a lot of that de facto freedom because they don't have any de jure freedom. Do you see something like that happening in Chile, especially since the political climate is changing a little bit?
Yeah, Chile's always been pretty stable in, when compared to the rest of the South American countries, and it's
Right.
it's even more stable now. And I don't see the state going away or granting autonomy to communities or anything like that in the
Hmm.
short term. I mean, maybe possibilities like that will open up in the future, but um, seasteading has always been one of the options that appealed most to me in terms of achieving legal sovereignty for any kind of a new community project.
Hmm.
And so it's not a coincidence that our project is on the ocean front. Uh,
Ah, okay.
we
That makes
have,
sense.
yeah, we have the potential to build a dock and a shipyard and experiment with seasteading type technologies in the future. But first things first.
No, absolutely. I mean, that makes total sense. So in terms of like building the project itself, what are some of the biggest challenges you've overcome?
Oh man, everything's been a major challenge for us because this is our first project. It's
Right.
been learning curves everywhere. And, eh, there's all these steps that have to take place that no one sees because they're happening in the background, right? Whether it's getting legal permissions or zoning or, permits, or we have to do all these environmental impact studies and soil
Mhm.
tests and all this crap that goes into the project before you start to actually swing any hammers, like we're just finally getting to that point now where we're pouring foundation, or we're at that stage where you can visibly see things happening. And I mean, from the first time we started thinking about this stuff, it's been 3 years. So there's been a lot going on behind the scenes, and finding the right spot is critical too, because
Right.
it would be it would be a damn shame to put in all this work and build a thing if it was in the wrong spot.
Yeah, no, most definitely. You don't want to be a place where no one's near. Like, is it true that the spot you have is sort of near a research university in Chile?
Yeah, actually, Valdivia is home to five universities.
Really?
And yeah, so there's a lot of students flowing through town at all times. There's a lot of there's a big floating population. Like I think the native population here is only about 100,000 people, but at the peak season, there's about 100,000 students and 100,000 tourists. So the town can get to three times its size.
Interesting. I've always been interested in the relationship to research university and sort of these hubs of innovation. Silicon Valley, it's very clear you have Stanford and Berkeley. Do you see something similar possibly happening in southern Chile?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge focus for us. Anytime we bring up the intention or the theme behind Fort Galt, that is, building a tech shop and having it available to people that live in the area to come and see how entrepreneurs function, see how people build their businesses from scratch, see how people invent new things and create new technologies and all this stuff. The students and the people in town, they love that stuff because Valdivia has been and still is making a very conscious effort to become a tech hub. So there's a lot of research programs, there's a lot of grants for programs like that that the state wants to give out, and there's a lot of interest in that kind of stuff.
Interesting. And I know you kind of have an alternative take on education. At least like you've worked or you lectured at Exosphere, I believe, which is sort of like an alternative form of education that includes things like engineering and Ethereum. How does that sort of relate to your project?
Yeah, you could sort of think of Fort Galt as being akin to the residential version of a one-room schoolhouse.
Uh-huh.
Um, I had grandparents that went to a one-room schoolhouse in Canada, and they would always tell stories about how much better it was because the older students could help the younger ones, and the younger ones had a new perspective on things that the older people didn't consider. And there are some people who have gone their whole lives and they've built up some great businesses and done some great things, and they're at a point now where they would prefer to just help someone else get their start and pass on their knowledge and wisdom and that kind of thing. And then there's all these young guys who have a lot of spirit, they have a lot of ambition and determination and creativity and stuff, but they don't have the real world wisdom to know how to implement things properly. So the idea is to have this kind of melting pot of older and younger, experienced, not experienced startups, all that kind of stuff, just kind of converging in one spot so that there's people that can help others and just kind of support each other. The main two tenets are inspiration and support.
Excellent. It sort of sounds like, and it's obviously it's not a startup city, but it sounds like a microcosm of what a startup city could be. It seems that the biggest benefit of a city is high density. And if you have high density, you have close interactions with people, and you sort of get an opportunity, for lack of a better word, for ideas to have sex, essentially. So I definitely like that.
Absolutely. And like no one's good at everything. And generally these, startup projects require a lot of different types of talent. And that's something that I learned firsthand at Exosphere was the value of having a lot of differently skilled people close by. Where, okay, let's say you have a great idea, but you need help with maybe writing sales copy or shooting a promotional video or something. If there's someone nearby that is good at that stuff, then you can just go and knock on their door and say, hey, buddy, come help me with this. And then you have kind of this neighborhood mentality where you give freely because you know that you're going to ask them for help yourself someday,
So is there a type of personality that you're looking for of people that you want living in your co-living community in Fort Galt?
Generally, if you're the type of person that can even come down here and and live and work and stuff, then that's half the battle right there. I mean, that demonstrates a certain personal responsibility and mental flexibility and courageousness. Not everyone has what it takes to just pick up and leave and start something new in a foreign land where maybe they don't speak the language and they don't know what they're getting into completely. And, you have to be comfortable with a certain level of risk. And so if you show up, I just assume that you're most of the way there. If there's little petty disagreements about finer points of philosophy, that's fine. We don't really care.
Yeah, you don't want a
That's all
homogeneous
stuff.
philosophy anyways. That'd be boring.
I mean, if you reach consensus through discussion and stuff, great.
Right.
But if not, I mean, that's just more stuff to talk about.
But that's an interesting idea that travel or being in a foreign land is sort of like a threshold cost associated with that. And if you can reach that, you sort of signaled that you're capable.
Yeah. Exactly, because there's so many armchair philosopher libertarians that I met, who talk a good talk and they can probably cite verses from, Walter Block or Hoppe or whoever, right?
Right.
But they never actually get up and take any action. And I would much rather, you know, throw in with somebody who maybe isn't well versed in all of this stuff, but actually does take action and follow through.
I really like that. And I mean, the motivation for, doing these sort of projects before I was doing a Bitcoin project, now startup societies was, I want to put these ideas into action. So how do we turn these young people who are interested in these ideas to turn from libertarians to, let's say, exitarians, people who exit the system and act on these ideas and create alternatives?
Just start doing something, even
Yes,
if
yes.
it's even if it's not the right thing, even if it's not the thing that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. Just get together with a few, sharp minds and start doing something. Start building a business, because as soon as you're in the marketplace, as soon as you're facing the market and you answer to your customers and you have people tearing apart your idea and giving you feedback and helping you make things better, and I mean, you just naturally go through this process of figuring things out. And eventually you'll meet the right people and you'll find the right thing and you'll get on the right path just naturally.
I totally agree with that. Like people keep asking me, like, what can you do to prep, to be an entrepreneur? And I tell them, you don't
Nothing.
prep. Exactly. It's the whole
Exactly.
purpose. Um, but if you want to be an entrepreneur and you're already in the process of being an entrepreneur, what are some good skills or knowledge sets that you should know to be really effective?
Well, no matter what you're into, you can always find other people to help pick up the slack wherever you're lacking. But I mean, coding is always useful. Knowing, how to build a good website is always useful. Sales copy, marketing, all this stuff, just basic like leadership, economics, like, study up the basics on how to get your balance sheet functioning properly so that you're accumulating assets and avoiding liabilities, and just the basics, and then depending on what your project is, you'll probably need specialization in certain things, but that'll present itself as it comes.
So I would be remiss if I did not ask about the previous project of Galt's Gulch, because a lot of people have a lot of questions about it. I'm sure you get all the time because you have similar names. They're scared that it'll go down a similar path. Can you tell me what were some of the problems associated with Galt's Gulch and how you're actively trying to avoid them?
Man, we could do a whole show on that.
Maybe we should. Let's go over the brief points here then.
Right. A few of the things that jumped out at me, because basically I showed up there wide eyed and full of, expectations.
Right.
And I figured the smartest thing to do would just be to volunteer to help out, to help bring this thing into reality, because it was still pretty early when I showed up. And it was basically the project manager and a couple of guys in the sales office, and that was it. There was nobody that bought in that actually lived on site or anything like that. And
Mm.
so it turned out that they were pre-selling lots that didn't legally exist yet. The idea, yeah, I know,
Wow.
red flag right there. So the idea was that they believed, supposedly, that they could get the legal permissions and that they could get the approvals for these subdivisions, but they didn't have them yet. So it ultimately turned out that the area is environmentally protected so that you can't subdivide as small as they wanted to.
Mm.
So it was impossible for them to deliver these lots that they had already sold. So that's probably one of the biggest problems right there.
Yeah.
And the project manager was one of those guys who would rather try to figure things out for himself and not tell anybody that there's a problem. So,
Uh,
that doesn't always work out so well. And the communication was stifled amongst even people that bought in. People were not encouraged to talk with each other and compare notes. There was a culture of, there's something wrong, but let's keep it quiet and hope it all fixes itself. you
I've
know?
seen so many startups go down that same route because they want to keep
Yeah.
it's the curse of agreeableness. I mean, it can help in some certain social situations, but if you're building something, you need to be constantly communicating, "Hey, we're screwing up and we need to fix it."
Yeah, and like especially when the success of sales depends on appearances, you know, like they don't want
Yeah.
to look weak, they don't want to look like there's a problem so that people get scared. So instead, they just keep things quiet and things get worse. And yeah, so we basically decided right from day one that we're going to take the opposite approach. And we have hangouts with all of the members, and we have a Facebook group where all of the members are in it and they can talk freely with each other. And we always bring up everything as it's happening. And also, the members are actively involved in the process step by step because we did not pre-sell anything outright. We didn't collect full payment for anything, and
Mhm.
basically, we have things set up in this incremental structure where we collect percentages of people's payments as they're needed. So right now we're going into the construction of the foundation phase. So we know from our construction company that we need this many dollars to do this phase. So we go to the members and say, okay, so now for this phase, we need, let's say, 20% of your payment to pay off these costs. So they send in those payments and we pass it on to the construction company and that phase gets done. So there's no need for like escrow or any kind of a trust system there. And ultimately, trust gets built up over time as we prove ourselves with each step.
Right, that's a much more accountable system. Like it's sort of like a KPI, or just like if you have progress, you get the money. Versus the Gulch project, it seemed like they were just given a lump sum and
Yeah.
just completely screwed it up.
Yeah.
But so my last question, where do you see the Gulch project, sorry, Fort Galt project going in 10 to 20 years? Do you see you franchising in other places around the world? Do you see you just growing more intensely in Chile? What's your vision?
Personally, I'm just focused on getting this one done as
Fair point.
a good, successful showpiece. And then I would love to basically just put everything out there so that people can use it as a sort of template and copy it. I mean, obviously, you can't copy every single detail because conditions vary from country to country.
Hmm.
But someday I would love to see places like this popping up all over the world and then network together so that if I want to travel from Chile to France, let's say, then I find the location in France and contact them and find out if somebody has a room for rent or if they want to trade with a room of mine and they can come here for a while or you know it's kind of like how the Freemasons, they have like a lodge in every city basically.
Right.
And that makes it so that they can travel the world freely, knowing that no matter what city they show up in, they have friends there. They can show up and have somebody hook them up with work or introduce them to people, and that they have like a support system. So I would love to see this kind of turn into something like that.
Well, there you have it, you guys. Gabriel Scheare is creating best practices, networking key players, and helping create a new decentralized world of startup societies. Gabriel, thank you for being on our show, and I hope to have you on shortly.
Right on. Take care.